what I'm going to talk about. Who am I? What is a man possibly doing here talking about women in the games industry? A little bit about my nervousness before coming across to Kyiv to give this speech. I'm going to give you some stats in an area that I can talk about, which is the number of women working in the creative media sector in the UK. Tell you about a little bit about the organisation that I founded 7 years ago called Women in Games. And then I'm going to try and get across to those of you who need to know why women in games as a subject matters. And I'm going to go through some of the misconceptions that people have about women working in the games industry. And then I'm going to show some videos. So I'm going to shut up and let some women do some talking. We had the European Women in Games Conference in London. It's the 6th one we've organised just over 2 weeks ago, September the 7th. And I've got some clips from one speaker and one panel from that conference that I think you'll find interesting. I certainly found it very interesting. I do think you'll find it informative. And then for those of you that you want to do more to help encourage more women to join the industry, I've got some suggestions. So firstly, who am I? I've worked in the games industry for over 20 years now. In 1996, I set up an international recruitment company called Interactive Selection. So I'm going to be talking about women in games today, but that's not my day job. My day job is to try and encourage both men and women to join the industry to fill the many spots available that all developers have all over the world. It's a global issue. We are always after the best talent, and agencies like Interactive Selection exist to help developers fill their jobs, but also to help people who maybe have lost their jobs find their next job. In 2009, 7 years ago, I founded this organisation, Women in Games, WIGJ, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And this year, just to show that the world doesn't stand still, I founded another organisation called BAME in Games. BAME is an acronym that stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Talent Within Games. So it's an organisation that is very new, but it's designed to encourage more ethnic, racial diversity in the games industry. So, I was a bit nervous coming across to Kyiv to talk about gender diversity. I don't know much about the Ukrainian market. There may be stats to show that there are thousands of women working in the games industry in the Ukraine. But if there are, I don't know them. I have been to Kyiv before. It was 30 years ago, so obviously in a very, very different times. And if you look at the number of speakers at this conference, there are very few women. In fact, there are 60 speakers, I think, and I've met many of them, and I think this conference is very fortunate to have some of the top talented speakers come, not just from locally in the CIS region, but from all over the world. But there are not very many women. 3 women speakers, in fact, 2.5 women speakers, because Vera had to speak with Paul earlier on today. So if you've gone to various tracks, you may not have seen a woman speaker for 2 days. We do have one woman, Angelina, I think, who's speaking after me in this room at 5 o'clock. So if you feel inclined, then definitely stay to watch Angelina. But I was in London, and I'm thinking, I'm nervous here. Perhaps the audience is going to be hostile. Perhaps there aren't any women in the games industry in the Ukraine. Now, I've been here for 2 days, and the perception is not the reality. I can see that the Kyiv, Ukraine, is not very different to the UK. There's always going to be differences, but that's the perception, and that's the perception that having very few women speakers gives out to the world. So this may be a showcase for the best that the games industry can offer in the CIS, but it is saying, the message is, it's a boys' club. Women have not reached the top echelons of the games industry. So that's just an observation, it's not a criticism. But I'm very pleased to say I wouldn't be here if wargaming.net, one, hadn't invited me, but two, supported my conference just over 2 weeks ago. So I'm encouraged to be here and look towards the long term. So is the games industry very different from other sectors? And the answer is yes, it is. So I've got some numbers here which I won't dwell on, but it looks at, in the UK, at the number working in radio, TV, film, animation and VFX. And you can look at the percentages working in radio, television and film, very close to 50-50, half women, half men. Even in animation and VFX, it's nearly 30%. The games industry last year, when this survey was done, was 19%. When I set up Women in Games 7 years ago, the number working in the games industry in the UK was only 6%. Like 1 in 15, and I thought that's just terrible. You know, that is not right. Something needs to be done. We need to support these women. So I set up this organisation, Women in Games, and initially it had very limited objectives. I just wanted to put a website together, and so that anyone that was interested could go and look at the website, move on, and I didn't have any more time commitment beyond that. But it sort of snowballed after that. People thought the website was fantastic. They said, can we have a LinkedIn group? And so I set up a LinkedIn group, and then they said, oh, we've met online. It's the really first time we've had a chance to speak to each other in a safe space, as it were. Can we meet up? So I thought, okay, it's not very difficult to use tools like meetup.com to put together a meetup. So we now have a woman chief exec, Mary Claire Iserman, an executive committee of mainly women, but some men. We have, some of the numbers are a bit out of date, as many as 5,000 people in our LinkedIn group, nearly 2,000 from the US, about 1,000 in the UK, and the last time I looked there were 14 from the Ukraine. Hey. So I'm hoping at least one of that 14 is here today. If you are here today, definitely come and say hello to me after the session and say, look, I joined your organisation 5 years ago. Okay, and the question that always asks, why is a man involved? So I'm very quickly going to explain. So at the time, in the UK, there was only about 400 women working in the games industry. And everyone works in the games industry to make games, not to form a trade association. I had, by that stage, worked for over 10 years in games recruitment. I'd interviewed many men and many women about their career aspirations, why they may have lost their job, why they're looking for a job now. So I realized that there was a problem. And in recruitment, you have to be very well connected, so you know lots of people. So I was in a position to help. I did want to help, so I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to set up this website. But I'm going to state the obvious now that I'm not speaking here as a woman in games. I'm not a woman in games, but I'm an ally of women in games. So very quickly, here are some of the myths, some of the reasons why men in particular say women shouldn't be working in the industry, and I've called them the mythbusters. So myth one, women are not interested in making games or not capable of making games. Well, these are the numbers in the UK. So we started off in 2009 with 400, 2011 there were 800, last year there were 2,000. So women are making games. They do have the talent, they are there, it's growing big time, and that will be the picture, I guess, across all countries. Myth two, and this is particularly prevalent for young men students at university. Women are a threat. More women means less men. Well, I thought, let's just show the stats and take out the women to show how the game industry as a whole is growing. So in 2009, 6,400. This is UK. 2011, the number had gone down for both men and women because of the banking crisis and everything like that. The games industry, unfortunately, is not immune to what happens in the world as a whole. But last year, 8,300. So the game industry is growing. There's room for both men and women. Clearly, you have to be talented. It's difficult to get a job in the game industry. I know that, but it is growing, and we love this industry. Myth 3: games are either for men or for women. There's not much crossover. So let's look at World of Tanks. You know, how many women play World of Tanks? How many men play Candy Crush? Let's look. Okay, so this is looking at data that's a couple of years out of date, but I think it's still relevant. So looking at Candy Crush and Clash of Clans demographics. So the reality is that 60% of Candy Crush players are female, but 40% are men. Likewise with Clash of Clans, 77% of players are male, but 23% are female. So the best-selling mobile games sell to both men and women. And if your game is only selling to men or only selling to women, clearly there's a big market opportunity there to retain all your male or all women players and develop the other market. Myth 4. There are almost no women speakers for games conferences. Now, I don't envy anyone organising a conference, and I know for this conference it was all organised in like 3 weeks, 3 months, not 3 weeks. But the net result was 57 men and 3 women speakers. Now, the conference I organised 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago, had 35 women speakers and 7 men speakers. So if the organisers of this conference are looking for more women speakers, you just need to go to womeningamesconference.com, and there are the profiles of 35 experienced women that I'm sure would only be too pleased to be invited to speak at the same conference next year in Kyiv. Women in games only work in human resources or marketing, and very occasionally art. So this is a picture from the European Women in Games Conference. This is a picture of Timea Tabori, who is a server programmer at Rockstar North making Grand Theft Auto. And I thought the picture was interesting because she's working on the 3 Cs, but then she only had 40 minutes in her workshop. We've had 2 days to look at the 4 Cs. And these are some of the audience at this workshop. So I think there are 11 heads there of women that are keen to be learning all about online and server programming. So women are working very ably and capable in all sectors of the game sector. Now I'm going to show a video now. This video is of one of our keynote speakers, a lady called Anne Morrison, who is the chair of BAFTA. BAFTA, the British Academy for Film and Television Arts, that also has a big games sector now. So BAFTA represents both film, TV and games. And she's a woman advising other women, so I think it'll be quite interesting for the men in the audience to listen what might happen there. So Pasha, if you can play the video.
And in order to get on, I also tell people that they should be pushy with charm. Now, so in order to, again, sadly, our virtues are not obvious to everyone if we kind of sit in a small room and just think, we'll do this good work and eventually someone will notice us and it'll be great. They don't. So you have to kind of get out there. And this comes hard to some of us who've actually sort of feel like you're brought up to be modest and to say, oh, your painting's much better than my painting, and you're doing this much better. So it's a kind of inbuilt female thing we don't like to boast. So we need to get over this a bit, okay? And we definitely need to be a bit pushy. Pushy, the thing is, if you're just pushy, then you're just obnoxious and nobody wants to know you, okay? So if you're just charming, then nobody notices you and you're charming and lovely, but in a corner. So the combination of pushy with charm is what you need to be in order to get on. This is the people who've had that combination of the people who've risen, as far as I can see. Because the thing is, people don't actually mind you being pushy. They remember being pushy themselves. But if you do it in a lovely way, with a bit of emotional intelligence, then you can get away with it and they won't take it against you. And then the other thing is always to sort of have a kind of positive energy. There's lots in this industry that we can get bitter about, okay? We could spend our time being bitter, we can go in a downward cycle. Don't get bitter. Or if you do get bitter, keep it to yourself. Project positivity and help other people as well, particularly help other women get on, and be generous, be enabling. I think that's really important. People take you at your own estimation, so don't run yourself down. I used to have people who in the department who would go and say, oh, I'm really not very good at developing ideas. They don't think, oh, Jane is a lovely person and she's probably brilliant at developing ideas. They just think, it's amazing she's doing what she's doing if she's no good at that. So never undersell yourself. And the other thing is be brave. So if you're in a dilemma, it could be, do you want to go water skiing? It could be, do you want to sort of develop this new product? Whatever it may be, something that makes you a bit nervous because it's not something you've done before. I'd really say favour yes over no. Favour yes, and take the risk. So don't always say yes. There are definitely some things you should say no to, by the way. But if it's a dilemma and you think, oh, do I dare? Say yes if you possibly can. I think that you have to push yourself a bit in order to get yourself out of your comfort zone, and that's when you learn the most. So with all of this, BAFTA, getting back to BAFTA wants to help you, okay? We want to have a more diverse industry. We believe in diversity in the widest sense. And it's not just about fairness, it's about creativity, so that we get all the voices heard, so that we hear from every single one of you with all the diverse experience and backstory that each of you has got, because we don't want to hear from a narrow demographic and see the world through their eyes, because that will distort the way everybody thinks. And BAFTA
Okay, so that's my editing there. But I just want to repeat what Anne Morrison said there at the end. We want to have a more diverse industry. We believe in diversity in its widest sense, and it's not just about fairness. It's about creativity, so that we get all voices heard, so that we hear from every single one of you and all this diverse experience and backstory that each of you have got. We do not want to hear from a narrow demographic and see the world through their eyes, because that would distort the way everybody thinks. So we want more women in games, not because it's fair. Yes, it's fair. Feminism is about equality, because we do believe that more women in games means more creative and commercial success in the games industry. Anna, she says it much better than I do. But diversity is not just about women and gender. As I said earlier, I created this organisation, BAME, in games, and for the first time ever in the history of the UK games industry, I managed to get together a panel of people with racial heritage, ethnically diverse. So we're going to listen to a short clip now talking about character representation in games. And we'll be hearing from the owner of Digital Jam, Tanya Laird, the producer at Sumo Digital, Sitara Schefter, and a UI artist from Frontier Developments, the people that developed Elite.
Hey, which characters are in the game? Oh, all 6 of our characters are Caucasian. Has anybody considered having an Asian character? Has anybody considered having, an Afro-Caribbean character? And that's conversations that, when you raise those questions, it creates a little bit of awkwardness in the room, not tension, awkwardness, because it's something that people generally don't consider. And I think the more growth there is of ethnic minorities within the industry, that will slowly start to decrease, because there'll be more people bringing up those questions, and there'll be more people who actually work there and say, hey, why don't I have a character that looks like me? Why can't I play as me in the game?
Yeah, it's completely. Anybody else want to touch on that one?
Right. I had maybe 3 companies where I was kind of the token foreigner or token girl at one point, where all of them were boys, and. I'm not going to say that they're going to ask me, oh, what's it like being a girl? But, you know, there's a lot of things that I do from day to day which is a bit culturally different. And the biggest thing every year is that we've got Ramadan, where I do fast for 30 days. And sometimes I'm very into it, you know, like, the question I get every year is like, not even water? It's like, no. And they do. It comes from a place of concern where they're scared that, you know, I might faint or something. And I'm like, I've been doing this since I was 7 years old. It's fine, guys. And but it does come to a point where I'm the only source of information when it comes to Islam and things like that. And with any company that is big enough to have a HR department, there's things that you kind of have to be careful with. So there's a tiny anecdote of one of the companies I worked with where it was at the end of Ramadan, and we have a culture of bringing in cake for like birthdays and things like that to share with the whole company, with your colleagues. And I brought in cake for, you know, Eid. I was like, hey. So I thought it'd be funny, you know, saying, because I thought I was the only Muslim in the whole company. So I started my email to the whole company saying, Salam infidels. There's cake in the kitchen, and I signed it off with your favorite muzzy, Anissa. And what I was trying to achieve, you know, I was trying to downplay the word a little bit, kind of like, you know, a bit of, because there's things going on in the world where it's really full of tension, and I'm trying to make it a bit more lighthearted and maybe use muzzy as a nice word instead of a bad word. That did not go down very well. I did get called into HR, and they printed out my email, and they was like, so this email, this word, they didn't say the word, they pointed at the email the whole time. And basically I just apologized, and I found out later on there is another Muslim in the other building. I was like, oh, sorry, we still haven't met. It's a big but yeah, so there's a lot of these kind of things where to me it's so natural for me to joke about it, because, you know, that's just half of what I'm half Muslim and half Malay ethnically, and I've been here in England for so long that I don't feel particularly foreign, but then I'm still seen as foreign, and there's a lot of things, you know, I kind of say all these things, and I think a few people in the company will be like, oh, you can't say that, and I was like, no, but I'm Asian, you still can't say that. So I'm still learning about what I can or cannot say, but as far as I'm concerned, I try not to get too offended on certain things, you know, as long as it's like lighthearted banter, you know, that's how we all get along, really. So, yeah.
Okay, so in terms of developing minority characters, do you think development teams are afraid of getting it wrong and they just avoid it, and that's why we're not represented?
In my experience, to be brutally honest, I don't think they're even considering it. I don't think it's even a consideration. And I don't know how many of you guys know Kate Edwards over at the IGDA, but her work at Microsoft and what she's been doing over the years in terms of culturalization within games is such a new thing. And people don't really understand what this is all about and why we would need to do these things. But actually, I think realistically, a lot of development teams aren't thinking about this until after the fact, after they've done the development process, and they bring somebody like Kate in to look at it and kind of review it and kind of go, ooh, actually. And I do think it is.
These barn doors.
I think just to add to that, I mean, I think the industry start making more progress with obviously adding more female characters into games. I think that's something we are starting to see improve, that you have an option of a male and a female, or sometimes you have more female protagonists in games. And I'm hoping, that we do start to expand upon ethnic minorities and different colour skin, different colour races, start seeing that in games as an option. I mean, the one thing that excited me, and it's not exactly a character, but when the Wii came out, you can make a me, and I remember thinking, oh wow, you can pick exactly, and I can make this me look like me. And it's a really small thing, but it's things like that as they start to develop, and hopefully as they start to see different communities, different people from different backgrounds playing those games, it's hopefully something we'll start bringing into games more often as well. And it's about people like everybody that's sat in this room raising those questions, saying, hey, why don't we have a character who has a different colour skin? Why don't we have a character who is from a different part of the world? And it's about us bringing that in, because we're the developers in this room that should be doing that.
Yeah, I was the only person among my friends who made a me that looked like me.
Okay, so that's my editing there at the end. So this was the Women in Games panel. And hopefully I've sort of brought to your attention some of the issues that exist regarding diversity in the industry. But I don't want to raise the issues without some suggestions or solutions of what can be done at an individual or at a company level. So first of all, the Women in Games network is for women and men. Okay? So it's supporting more women joining the industry and surviving and prospering in the industry. So go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, join the network. We're on Twitter at WIGJ, W-I-G-J. We have over 6,000 followers. That'll tell you about all the events that are happening in the UK and more so around Europe, where you can get involved. And encourage debate. No one changes their mind or without some kind of discussion on this subject. So it's not taboo. We can talk about it. Encourage it individually or in your company. And lastly, we launched at the conference 2.5 weeks ago the concept of the Women in Games Ambassador. Women in Games ambassadors are both individuals and companies who can portray the organisation of Women in Games out into their own companies or their local cities or their regions or indeed nationally. So yes, Women in Games started in the UK, but we'd love for it to spread across Europe. And we launched 4 founding corporate ambassadors at the University of Greenwich on the 7th of September. And the ambassadors do 3 things. They reach out to women in all regions of Europe to grow the network. They reach out to young women at school and at university to encourage them to consider the games industry as a career. And they also reach out to regional leaders and governments to form long-term strategic relationships. So this is what individual or corporate Women in Games ambassadors are doing. And I mentioned 4 companies that have already started out as founding ambassadors. They are IO Interactive from Copenhagen in Denmark, Paradox Interactive from Stockholm in Sweden, Techland from Wrocław and Warsaw in Poland, and Wuga from Germany. So if there's anyone from the Ukraine, from Kyiv, that is interested in becoming a corporate ambassador, then we'd love to have you. I've got a sign saying it's 10 minutes to go, but I'm just about out of slides, so there will be more time for questions. So I'm going to stop now. Any questions on any subject to do with women in games or diversity in the games industry? You're very welcome to ask me now, or I'm around and we'll be at the party and be very happy to take them then.
Anyone?